Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Governance Committee meeting of February the 2nd. I would like to start by acknowledging that the CVRD is on the unceded territories of the Kwotson, Malahat, Subasset, Halalt, Penelakut, Staminas, Liaxin, Pauquachin, Dididat, and Pachidat nations, whose people have walked here gently for thousands of years. So this is my first time sitting in this chair, battling a bit of imposter syndrome. But I'd like to take a moment just to reflect and set some intentions for this now standing committee. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to get to dive into our governance processes. Governance is kind of, when I started, I campaigned on transparent governance, and then I started and thought, I don't actually know what governance is. So this last year has been an incredibly steep learning curve, and I think we have just such an immense privilege to make decisions about the land that we live on and the services that we provide through the regional district. And that means it's really important to have a fundamental understanding of what is good governance. I think that is going to involve some training that we have coming forward. And I think what I've observed over the last year is sometimes we're like a totally cohesive body and we're like wonderful personalities and we get along. And sometimes we get murky and our meetings get really long and they go on and we kind of get off track. And so what I'm looking forward to in diving into these policies is figuring out how we can tweak them to serve us in a better way to guide our decision making, figure out what's working and not working, and to pull all the unique expertise that we have in all of us together so that we can make really clear collective decisions together that serve the public. Because it's very clear we have a group of really smart, educated, lovely people that I really like being with on a regular basis. And it also doesn't mean this will always work. Sometimes it's going to be fun times like bowling and karaoke, which I hope you all sing. And I want to say that I'm sure there's going to be times that we don't agree, but I commit to respecting the decisions of this committee, even if they differ from my personal opinions. You might not know I'm an only child, but somehow I'm okay with a little bit of sacrifice for the greater good. My intention that I want to start out with is that we're able to find common ground, mutual respect for each other, and a collective understanding of the decisions that we'll make here, that we've been elected to make. So with that, Mr. Robbins.
Good morning, everybody. Patrick Robbins, Corporate Officer. So the formal staff, approval of your agenda for the Governance Committee today.
Moved. Seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
And that a recommendation under the adoption of minutes, the minutes of the Governance Committee meeting of May 10th, 2023 be adopted.
Moved. Seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Minutes are carried.
And then we have no business arising from there, and per our your meeting procedure bylaw, we have public input period. The purpose of the public input period is to provide the public with an opportunity to comment on an agenda item before this committee considers the item. The public input period procedure policy provides the public input period to proceed in a timely fashion. Public input period items cannot include matters which are or have been the subject of a public hearing. We have no one online that has registered, but we do have members in the public that may wish to provide you some input.
Welcome.
Good morning, Chair, respected leaders, both here in person and online with us and possibly listening afterwards. Ainetoch, Heitzapka, Siemna Siea, Thank you so much for the opportunity that this room represents for us to give our input. And I would like, this morning, my name's Kim Bernard and Area B, I would like to speak to both the benefits and drawbacks of that. So the benefits are that someone in a particular area can look beyond their area and come to a meeting like this and both hear and give input at the end of the meeting as to what a regional view would look like. And I appreciate that this allows for spontaneous input based on the meetings. However, it can be an intimidating process, and if everyone's not working together to create that welcoming atmosphere to help us get over our butterflies when we approach this microphone, you may not get that meaningful and authentic input that you're searching for. And in fact, local governments spend thousands of dollars to hire consultants to broadcast opportunities for the public, just sort of to give all kinds of input, but yet the most meaningful input sometimes happens right here. And certainly with reflection written later, in a written form, I should say, to legislative services. And so I'm advocating in my community for authentic network that's quick to respond in terms of communication and input. I feel this is really important for emergency planning. And it's something every area director and council member should have, is not only the appointed confidants to the committees that you oversee, but on a neighborhood basis and a map-directed tangible asset basis. You should know who the people are in those neighborhoods. For example, on my street, we have got the trophies and domestic science of the Cobble Hill Fair covered, and those are the kind of people you're going to want to know if the road infrastructures break or we have a major disaster or a snowstorm like the eastern part of Canada is experiencing. And so I feel that that's so important. And moreover, I'd also like you to consider someone coming into this space who maybe is of no fixed address, is not a taxpayer, and yet would like to advocate on behalf of themselves and their peers. And I wonder if they would be able to do that given the current language around how we express ourselves here at the microphone. And so I humbly ask that you consider the inclusivity and the wide diversity of the population base and some of the needs that are represented there. And not all of us have been to Toastmasters. Not all of us are Rotary presidents and trainers for our districts and are able to express ourselves well. So once again, thank you, Heitzapka.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and fellow directors. It's a privilege to be here. I wish to speak to the public input and to question period policy. Unfortunately, the public does not know the content of Mr. Robbins' report, but I am here to speak in favor of both those policies. When the board adopted the public input policy, it extended an invitation to the public to come and talk to you, and it's one of the rare opportunities that we have to get to speak to you as a whole. And I can tell you from being at this microphone before, it is so, I'm very thankful when I can make that eye contact with you and that I know that you are actively listening to whoever's here, because it's not easy. It's really not easy for us to get up and speak, even me, has some experience. And I know sometimes things get a little contentious maybe or intense, but I think when people are here to speak to you, it's about things that are affecting them personally. And we, as the public, like everybody else, are being impacted by rising costs, taxes, climate change, where taxes are going up. We're under the constant threat of floods, water shortages. And so when they get up here, they're speaking from their heart and they're speaking for the concerns of the impacts that it can have on the investments of their homes. because they've done that to secure their long-term financial viability and also to have a legacy to pass on to their children and grandchildren. So I think it's really important that we keep these. Could there be some tweaks? Absolutely, they can be. But I think it needs to be done in a collaborative fashion. And I hope that you all really listen to them and keep this process moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't see anybody else. So that moves us to the business at hand. I was going to help facilitate your discussion, and I didn't know if I was going to sit here or I should go up to the podium. I'm thinking I might go to the podium.
Yeah, what's your pleasure?
I think I might go to the podium.
I
Change it
I
up.
invite you to approach the podium.
All in favor?
I'm conscious of the camera here as well, so I'm framing myself. And so anybody that uses the podium, a reminder to look at themselves and frame themselves so we avoid this. So thank you. Really, I'm just here to assist and facilitate a discussion. You could see before you, you've been provided a binder here, and those that are joining us virtually, the directors, I believe these are in your inbox, or will be. And so what we thought, with the pleasure of the chair and of this committee and the CVRD chair, the first thing that we thought we would undertake was a review of the kinds of policies that you have adopted over the years. And so this is the list of all of those policies. Well, we've included many of them, but if you go to tab 15, 15 is actually the list of the other policies that we haven't printed out. And so we printed out what we thought might be the policies you would like to first have a look at it. That doesn't mean that we can't print anything else out and change the order. And so really this is a discussion about what policies you'd really like to look at, seek some more information, get some staff input, perhaps provide us some comments that we take away and we come back to you with some ideas and some updates, that sort of thing. We know that public input period, question period has come up from time to time. And so, again, we thought we would start with those particular policies, but there's nothing to say today that you can't speak to any of the other policies or have a good discussion about it. And with that, there's a bit of homework that you have to do. And there is a test, and the bar for passing is pretty high. So the homework is actually to review these. Reach out to Legislative Services as well and we can forward other policies for your review as well, provide you hard copies or electronic copies via email as well. Because really this is your work, and we're just here to help facilitate the discussion of your policies. If you start to look through the policies, you'll see the evolution of them, when they were adopted, and how old some of them are, how new some of them are. And I know there was just a bit of a discussion about question period and public input. And when you look at them, there's not a lot to them. That being said, most of the policies before you reflect good best practices. And in anticipation of discussion of the public input period policy and the question period, we did some research as well to see what the best practice was. And this, interestingly or oddly, however you look at it, is the best practice. And just before I continue on, I just wanted to clarify that I know that the agenda says I have a report. Really, I don't have a report. I'm just here to facilitate your discussion and then give you a bit of a sense of these particular two policies and when they come from. Before I begin, is there any questions about our game plan today, or this morning, rather?
Director Stone.
So I'm reading the report here, but it doesn't reflect the current status. So it did become a standing committee at our committee of the whole. We did appoint all members of the board as committee members, but although this report stated January 24th, was that before we made those changes?
Correct. So you
Okay.
haven't received the updated
Updated.
terms of reference.
Thank
Forgive us, we just haven't had the time to put that together, and we certainly will do that so that the new terms of reference reflect what happened at the board table and the adoption of some nuances, including, as the chair said, that this is now a standing committee. And there's a bit of nuance between that and a select committee.
So, and just a comment, the binder is fabulous, other than that error of the number 15 there.
Excellent.
Thank you
So
to the whole team.
the public, the question period and the public input period is really a help and is part of a suite, really, of the ways the public engage with you. And so here's a test for you all. Anybody think of other ways with which you engage directly with the public, and any other processes that you might have other than public input and question period?
A public hearing?
Public hearing, of course. If you'd use your microphone for those at home.
Meeting with our residents, our local residents from time to time.
So either informally or formally, sometimes you might have a bit of a town hall and you gather people together. That's another way of direct engagement. Any other?
Public information meetings?
Public information meetings. And generally, public information meetings, what are the subject?
Well, my understanding is generally land use service applications earlier in the process or prior to public hearings. Not on the same day,
Right.
hopefully.
No, that's a good one as well. Public information meetings, generally around land use decisions that will come before the board at an eventual date, generally going through electoral area service committee. Any other things that off the top of your head that you can think of where you might have other, Director Dick? Social media, for sure. So our website has a news section. Our communications team puts out press releases. That generally is we push the information out as opposed to engaging, but that's a way that we keep in touch and provide that kind of information. Director Nicholson.
We have commissions, advisory commissions. and we-
Exactly. So you have advisory planning commissions, you have the parks commissions. You just had a significant shift and a change in those commissions with regard when you went to a recreational or a regional recreation. So that's a good way to engage. Generally speaking, the engagement is a little different there in the business, and so we don't generally do direct engagement with the public at those commissions, but it is a way of providing information, providing opportunity for the public to meet with those that you've appointed and to hear the business in those commissions or those committees do.
Many of us have access to local publications,
To which, sorry?
to local publications, newspapers, little magazines, airdrop, mail drops, that kind of thing.
We still use traditional means, like for sure, with newspapers. Again, generally a way to provide information. The other thing when we talk about social media, another great engagement tool is it called My Cowichan? Is that? Plan Your Cowichan. That's right. And so some major initiatives that go on, it's a bit of an interactive as well. Often we will poll people, we'll ask, survey people. So right now, for instance, we know that there is the board is considering the acquiring of a major water system. And so to engage the electors, in this case, in that area, because in order for the board to make a decision to take over the water system, you need the assent of the electors. And so we're using that as a means with which to communicate and to exchange ideas and to get a sense of whether there is support from the electors that would pay for that system. So that's another way of us engaging with the public.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Everything that has been said so far, I do use Facebook, etc., but there's about 5 different ones. None of this has to be official. It can also be unofficial. For instance, every 2 weeks, I volunteer at the seniors' lunch, and there's 100 people there. You get feedback when you go around and talk to these people, and it's not just from Cobble Hill, it's from Mill Bay, it's from Shawnigan Lake, it's from everywhere. And people will ask you questions, even though they know it's not meant to be a political thing. They will say, they know who you are, they will. So it doesn't have to be an official public meeting. It doesn't have to be an official thing at all. It can be unofficial. And basically, to talk to the guy, talk to them all. It's not that difficult.
And so the point is that you've got a significant suite of ways with which to engage the public, including, and we'll get to the point of the public input period and the question period. And it provides a variety of ways of engagement. Just a couple of other things with regards to, we have other statutories. Somebody mentioned public hearings. When a development variance permit or a development permit is before you, there is statutory requirements that we send out notice to perhaps those properties that might be affected by such issuance of that kind of permit. And so we engage directly from those that are actually affected. As you can see, they often will come to the meeting and speak to that or send you correspondence in favor, that sort of thing. The other that you have directly that's on your agenda and as part of the bylaw for the structure of your agenda is delegations. And so that is another way with which the public engages with you. Like the public input policy and the question period, the parameters around delegations are very simple and straightforward. And again, the best practice has been that in order so that you can again provide that kind of input. And so there is not tons, but there are many ways with which the public engages with you. And the last one that on my list that I thought of was your information packages. And so Legislative Services from time to time will send you out packages of various correspondence. And so if there are topics or things that don't necessarily need a decision of the board, we'll provide you with an opportunity to look at information that has been shared by an individual, a group, that sort of thing. And it also provides you the opportunity when you're reviewing the information package, perhaps there's something in of note that you want to bring to the board. And that's another way of bringing things like that forward, is that by the call of one of the directors, that information can come before the board in its entirety. The other part about all of these opportunities, not only just to engage the people, but to obviously manage your business. And that's a good segue into these 2 specific policies that provide opportunity when you meet collectively here, which is, again, public input and question period. And so that's a good segue into it, that is really to help manage business. So you provide, Legislative Services receives lots of requests, lots of correspondence, want to engage with you, and by adopting these and using this certainly helps the staff help guide a member of the public, a resident or the like, to engage with you in the appropriate way. And again, that leads us to public input period and question period. Any questions so far? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so you mentioned that our policies they follow best practices. But are there any tweaks that you see would improve our policies, or are there, different things that you see in other jurisdictions that you think would help us meet best practices?
I think the key for, at least at the staff level, is to help manage your business. You're very busy. You can see over the years, and even the past year, how busy your agendas are, how packed your agendas are. And so any tools that we can use to help manage that business would be appreciated. And having said that, placing some sort of guardrails, a bit of a box around it, because when you look at some of the policies, you go, wow, that's pretty open-ended. So there are opportunities to consider putting a bit of some parameters around that, whether it's time limits, which we have, for instance, with these policies for input and question period around 15 minutes, limiting to a person to 3 minutes, that sort of thing. But because this is a policy of the board, you have flexibility and discretion in terms of altering that. And you do that from time to time. Somebody, even as a delegation comes and they're given 10 minutes, but it is an interesting topic, 10 minutes may not afford somebody enough time for you. And so then at your discretion, I've seen, and you've all seen, that you might extend those kinds of periods of time. That being said, I think that there is ways with which you might want to consider tweaking. And we'll get into that as well once we dive into some of the other ways of the public engaging with you. So for instance, I'm just going to, and I see that Ben has his hand up, and I'm wondering, we'll take a question before we go on.
Yeah, go ahead, Director Martman.
Thank you, and thanks, Ms. Robbins. A question I have is trying to understand your thoughts about how do we all work from the same information if some of these things are asynchronous or actually siloed in a way that we won't get it. Is that important for good decision making? Just curious.
Absolutely.
What a great question. Okay, Director Acton.
I'd let somebody else weigh in on that too.
Thank you. I feel like one thing that might be important to review is some of these policies that are new in the last term. Because you weren't here, Mr. Robbins, maybe you're not aware, like actually, for example, public input period was recently added, in the last term. And it was added for how it operates now. And then the question period was meant to be removed because it wasn't quite as detrimental as it is now. It's become a stump the chair kind of game, feels like. But and then the public input was added, and I think it's just interesting to review it and to understand, does it give us good governance? We often see people providing misinformation at that time, and it happens right before you're making a decision. And it also creates an environment where the politicians are playing to the politics of what was said. And so it becomes, in my opinion, not always the best governance. But I won't get into my opinion. But anyway, sorry. And then another item that was also new in the last term was, for example, items in Committee of the Whole, which it wasn't called that then, but Committee of the Whole, they would go to the board that day. So we extended it that they would go 2 weeks later so that the community had more opportunity to give input before the decision was made. So that was increased. And I guess I had one other point. I'm sorry, I forgot. But just the point to the question period, I'm really glad that we're reviewing it because it's become an opportunity for just speechifying at the end of, and a lecture at the end of many meetings. So I think that we are all very accessible, and if people wanted to actually have engaging input or actually understand how the meeting, what happened in the meeting, if they didn't understand, they can easily approach one of us or the chair to the side. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the battling of misinformation, I think, is a huge piece of this. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Chair. I look at these and I'm thinking that these dates might be, like I'm looking at the effective date of June 26, 2019, and I'm thinking, is that the last amended version?
Generally
Or-
speaking, yes.
Yeah, as opposed to the.
Introduction.
When it was introduced. So I'm thinking they've been around a little longer than perhaps Director Acton had indicated. And I just want to make a pitch for consistency. And what I mean by that is each of the chairs has different styles in how these are applied and the interpretation of them. And what we have now is a fairly well tweaked version in both of them. And there has been responses to trends that have developed. And so I think that in the application of these policies and for the community to know sort of what the expectations are of when they come to provide input prior to a meeting or pose a question afterwards, if there is a consistent application of it, then we don't have the tenuous connections to something that's in the agenda, or a great big long speech followed by an upturn in their cadence at the end to make it turn into a question. So I think the fair and consistent application is important, and I think we will find there will be periods in which there are really no need to even consider changes, and there might be some now. And I just want to reflect back to one of the reasons why I remember this so clearly. The question period was instituted, and it was simply we had done some business at the board, and I think we'd given first two readings to an application. And there were people in the gallery that had hung around to the end of the meeting to ask the question, what happens next in the process? And that was a great question, and it was the answer was helpful to them to know that there were further steps. So I think when applied that way, it's a great tool. Like I said, consistency, equal and fair application of it. I think we've got a couple of pretty good policies right now. We may need to tweak as we go along. Thank you.
And I think the other part about the consistency as well is when you're posed a question, we don't have a way, and maybe this is the tweak, is we don't formally track, if you will, other than the record in terms of the question, and especially if a question stumps you that day, but then consider having an opportunity during question period to report out on what it is the answer, or report to the rest of the public the answer to the question that was posed. That's one way of being consistent as well in understanding so that it doesn't appear that a question or the answer for that matter is lost. I know that Mike had a question.
I think,
Yeah, thank you very much.
just a sec.
Sorry.
I had Director Stone on my list. I didn't see your hand.
Oh, sorry,
He looked at me, but
I'm the chair.
Yeah, if I may ask our parliamentarian to please respect the chair's authority when calling on people.
I did say I was only going to assist.
That would provide
Facilitate,
good governance from Mr. 98%,
That keeps going.
just to lighten the room. But, sorry, just on the policy question, like, I like Ian's words, and I think we've stumbled a little bit with some difficult issues over the last few months. And I think that's part of the reason for this conversation. So although I think the spirit and intent of the policies is good, a little bit more firming up of the guardrails, just to say whether or not what's permissible, right, might help, both in the context of issues around misinformation or public hearings, because there's two pieces to this. Is, you know, we want to provide protection legislatively so that decisions aren't interfered with or undermined during either question period or public input policy. The easiest one is after something's gone to public hearing, it should say in the policy, you can't ask questions about it or give new input on it, because after third reading, that's the law, right? New information could derail a proper legislative process. And the other part is to uphold the value of a public hearing. Like if you have input on an item that's important to your community and it goes to public hearing, bring all that information with you, make it thoughtful, well considered, and presented at a public hearing. That's the best way to reach your elected officials. So I think just a little bit more detail on some of these, they're pretty light as it is, would be good on both public input and question period. And I think though that there's more of like a conversation that is around what would help community members and the board provide the best governance for our communities. And so when we get into a land use matter, you know, I have my own opinions, and very much, at least our council table, we've always said public hearing is where you get it to the community. So, you know, it may be that from a development application standpoint, our council is permissive to allow things to get to public input. We give some feedback in the earlier stages for a second reading. Perhaps the proponent will make some changes and bring it back before it gets sent to public hearing, but not to sort of cut it off before the community gets the opportunity to speak to it. Because that's what the process lays out for us. That's where you hear from all of the public, not a special interest group that's super, you know, passionate about a subject that might just represent a small amount of the community, but the breadth and depth of your community, even though I think we respect that opposition generally comes out in stronger force at a public hearing as well. But opportunity for all people to be able to hear. And if it is somewhat controversial, a public hearing gets people on both sides to say, hey, get informed and engaged and come to the public hearing. Or, and this is my favorite, write a letter in advance. Let people have time to digest your points, research, think about it, and really incorporate it into their decision making. And then that circles back to some of the challenge that I have sometimes around public input. And that's that good, well-thought, written input on a matter in advance of it, you know, preferably a day or two in advance, allows me to have time for consideration. There's no like, oh, you challenged my assumptions or the thought process I'm on, so I'm recoiling. You know, we're talking about human nature too, which can happen sometimes in the heat of a moment. It allows me time to digest it, think about it. I always say to people, like, if you're feeling triggered, write the email but leave it in drafts overnight, right? So in this way, it's very similar that you read something, it might trigger a response because we're all human animals and we have this sort of bias toward our decided points of view, to maybe change and incorporate the thoughts that you've received into your decision making. So I'm, you know, we don't have public input period at our municipality. I don't anticipate changing that. But I also respect that once it becomes part of your culture, it's important to maintain that opportunity. But I will always, especially on, you know, important matters that are of high consequence, encourage people to get your thoughts in before that moment, just before the decision is about to be made, because that gives your elected officials the opportunity and time to give full consideration and weight to the perspective that you bring to the matter. So I hope we can tighten these up a little bit. Like I can see just those little bits. The public input period conversation around public hearing is both a sort of like a procedural piece, but it's also like what helps us make the best decisions. So if we say until something's gone to public hearing, you continue to give public input on it, or is it better to say the full breadth and depth of the community's perspectives are best heard at public hearing. So perhaps land use matters that are being referred to a public hearing stage may or may not be something that's appropriate to speak to at public input, because you're basically giving a small segment of the population an advantage, if you will, to be able to come here and prevent something from
Start
going.
burning.
Don't worry, Sierra, I don't think it's anything burning. Might be your computer melting down.
Sorry,
It's okay.
my fire's going out.
Hopefully your house isn't on fire. If it is and you go off live, we'll understand. Anyway, the point being is I think we need to think really carefully about what actually, where in a governance committee provides the best governance, and encourage the public to give us the best kind of most valuable input with the most time to consider it on any matter. It just frustrates me, I think, as an outsider on land use matters, seeing public input assist in derailing a land use application that's never gone to public hearing because the full depth and breadth of community members don't get their opportunity because they can't make a 1:30 meeting on a Wednesday. Thanks.
And if I might, just to, some of the guardrails that we saw in local government as well, for instance, an application that is potentially subject to a public hearing, I think it was either Prince George or Fraser, Fort George Regional District, where they, at a certain point in time when something is introduced for readings and public input is sought at the meetings. After that and before the public hearing, further input, the guardrail there is it's in writing. I'm not suggesting that but that's one way that they provide a bit of a guardrail so that it also helps accumulate the public sentiment and the comment in anticipation of a public hearing and perhaps an ultimate decision on something. So that's a bit of a guardrail as well. The other thing, the challenge that I've seen since I've been here with input period and question period is, especially at question period, your business has finished, and often, as you've noticed, questions are relating to the item that has come and gone, and particularly land use. And I mentioned development permits and development variance permits. Other local governments, when a DP or DVP is before them, that is the opportunity in the moment, if you will, my words, for which to solicit not only feedback from the applicant, who's given an opportunity when the item comes on an agenda to provide a presentation or to add additional, but local governments then actually seek the public's input at that point in time. It helps manage the business, but it also provides you that you have the expertise in the room in that moment as well. Generally speaking, you'll have staff that are presenting the DP or the DVP, and that they can answer the questions that public might have, and or some pointed question to the applicant, and that the applicant can then provide additional information and feedback to you as well. So that helps manage that particular piece of your agenda as well, so that you're not waiting for a question period or public input for that matter before you've even gotten to the item and things change, or we forget about it, or we quickly don't remember what was said. So that's another way in terms of helping with guardrails.
Thank you. I've got quite the list, but I just wanted to summarize a little bit. Sorry, you want to make a quick follow-up?
The only other thing I wanted to say was, before the alarm bells started going off with what you just said, that public hearing written comments become part of the public record, whereas public input at first or second reading doesn't give the full weight to the input that might be received. Written comments or verbal comments at a public hearing are recorded for the public record, and to me carry more weight. But what you said after that triggered a whole bunch of things, but I'll get bottom of the next list.
No, and that's why the local governments, some have said that you put it in writing. So at a point in time, rather than just a verbal input where you want to record it, and you want to be able to record it, because as you know, often lots of time passes before you even get to advance a land use application. And so then that not only puts it on the record, but it also provides a record for you to refer to that input at the time. Especially, I don't think we record public hearings. Do we record? So there is videos. Okay, then I'll forget that comment. I didn't realize that we had.
Okay, thank you for all of that. what I'm also hearing, I think that's really important within, whatever tweaks we make to the policies, are that it's communicated really clearly to the public as well. So I'm just thinking about the webpage where people can go and find the agendas, and it kind of talks about public input, but just the clarity around the steps that they can make to communicate with us is really important. And then this is also tying into what Ian mentioned, with consistency of the chair, just the chair's roles and responsibilities and how to manage public input, understanding of jurisdiction, and, what should influence our decision-making and what shouldn't. So there's many policies that are coming up in this discussion, which is great. So I have a long list now. Director Wilson is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do apologise for addressing Patrick instead of yourself. I honestly believe that public input and question period are pillars of these meetings here, and it would be a shame to even consider getting rid of those. I'm a great believer, if it ain't broke, then don't try and fix it. It's not broke. There may be some tweaks we can make to it. And yes, and there have been some comments which say, yes, there may be some speechifying. There may be some gotcha questions at the end there, which are deliberately there to try and catch you out. But that is something that chairs can deal with and have to expect. And it's up to them to actually say, okay, I'm not going to put up with that kind of thing. So, buckle your belt there or whatever it is. One of the things that's come up just now, and I've heard this word 3 times or more, misinformation. That information that's being given at public input may not be in misinformation to the person who is presenting it. There's your problem right there. To us it might be, but it's up to us to sort out whether this is true or whether it's not. The person up there is not going to, I'm sure, is not going to get set up there and deliberately try and give misinformation. So that's one of the things that it's up, and that I really want to make sure that we understand. Misinformation exists, no two ways about it, but it's up to us individually to try and pinpoint the accuracy of that information. So my point here is we should keep the public input. One of the things that I've got that does things, I do have some concerns about the speech which is given beforehand. Basically, to me, it's very patronizing. And that should be changed. And if you look at the public input procedure policy, number 3 on the policy, it says, protocol requires all comments to be presented in a polite, calm, and courteous manner using respectful language and civility and decorum. It's there in one sentence, as opposed to be nice to us, don't be nasty to us, etc. Let's get it down to something which is not saying, you're a naughty boy, behave yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Director Istash.
Thank you, Chair Segal. Reading through this and I was flipping through the policy, the wording doesn't need to be in the public input period procedure policy, but I just keep thinking of the amount of times at North Cowichan we've, through our public input and question period policies, have implemented our safe spaces policy. I'm looking here, we've got a public safety policy, but actually doesn't speak to what North Cowichan's safe spaces, what we have in place, which is how to deal with the negative and dangerous side of it, and how to, deal with the public and as equally with staff and board members, which are typically through a code of conduct, but it's the respectful spaces. And as we see more and more things coming forward, we've had to implement that at North Cowichan, but we have that policy that's worded into the public input. I believe it's worded in there. My fellow North Cowichan directors can speak to that, but I just wanted to bring that up as maybe rather than having to keeping the public input and question period very succinct, that they're supported by another respectful spaces bylaw, especially in light of the last 4 years.
Yeah, I see Ms. Miles Wilson approaching. I think that policy's on its way.
Yes. Thank you, for raising that, Director Eustache. We actually have been actively working on developing the Safe Spaces draft of a policy or bylaw is what we're going to be proposing and bringing it back as a draft. But we have been looking at North Cowichan's as a kind of gold standard of this. And so thank you for doing that work beforehand, because that definitely helps us as we're preparing something. So because of what has been going on and some of the controversial situations in region, we do think it's time that we bring something forward and again, put some guardrails on things and provide us with those tools.
Follow up?
Thanks. I'll email that North Cowichan policy to the fellow directors. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Nicholson, your turn.
Thank you. I was just going to ask what the other municipalities, what they feel are best practices in their council meetings on these topics.
Director McGonigal, you want to answer?
Thank you. And similar to North Cowichan, we have implemented a safe spaces bylaw for similar situations that may occur. We're not to that point in the West Cowichan at present, as opposed to the Central Cowichan with the concentration of population, but just anticipating that may morph into the outer regions. Also, we have implemented public input and question period in both of ours, and it's the prerogative of the chair to keep that process in line and to rule people out of line should they veer off of that. So it's very precisely mentioned at the beginning that it is only for those items which are on the agenda at the time. And that's for us as chairs to make sure that isn't veered from with the guardrails in place. So I would encourage that at least we look at these two continuing with piggybacking on the safe spaces, which gives us an opportunity as chairs to stop the meeting and take a recess and make sure that we are all feeling as safe as possible doing the work that we are elected to do.
Director Staples, do you want to share anything?
Just the same thing. I mean, similar to what's being said, but I've stopped meetings on occasions because of people or council in the room being out of order and just needing to take that break. And also in the past have actually rescheduled meetings for the same reason. And I think that in extreme situations, those are really good tools because what generally happens is that does bring everyone does calm down when you actually just take that 10-minute break. The room recognizes that, you know, you're serious about the fact that this is just not appropriate, and things seem to move forward calmly after that. We've had some pretty heated public hearings where I've had to do that on occasion, and so that seems to be a tool for when things get extreme. Other than that, we don't get a lot of people in our question period generally, again, unless it's a pretty intense issue. And we just had a joint meeting with North Cowichan, and I asked staff about how long our question period was, because I knew we'd put a limit on it, and because it's something that happens so rarely other than in public hearing, it went on, and it is only 10 minutes, so there's also that, and just bringing people back to the question. And if they're not asking questions, then they just have to be, you know, you've got sort of, from that, you've got, you know, one strike and you're out. If you can't come up with a question in your next breath, then that's it, no more time at the mic. So I think it's just practicing those things and taking the criticism that's going to come with them.
And Director Stone, do you have anything to add to the meeting?
No, obviously there's certain situations, both legislatively and policy-wise, where we encourage public input during the matter, so budget decisions, public hearings, obviously. Generally, like Mayor McGonigal, we don't, you know, we've had one instance, I think, where we had to recess a meeting, and it wasn't because of any kind of input, it was just during the meeting when the matter was being discussed. There was some heckling and stuff. But yeah, generally, like, the concentration of some of the issues that lead to these discussions is mostly centered around the core. And that's for a lot of reasons: population density, service provided, and how people interface with the services that are in the core. But yeah, generally haven't had to sort of change things as a result. Just for clarity, we did update our question period policy recently, though, to sort of just make it more directed that it did need to be on agenda items, and it was for people from the community. But yeah, not generally, not really any issues with the policies that we've had. Last night, we had an example where we had a major agenda item, and some of the people that would have the most interest in a public input period actually emailed them. And my commitment to them is always that I will bring it up when the matter is being discussed. I will go through your questions. And I received a thank you email this morning from the community member saying, thank you for bringing up my questions. And, oh, sorry, I missed the reference to my first question on page 16 of the agenda. So it's worked really well, and it has encouraged people, the most interested community members, to consistently email their questions in on the items on the agenda, so we have that time to consider it and answer it during the meeting.
Mr. Robbins, you'd like to add?
I know that you've got a speakers list, but I just wanted to talk about the preamble that I'm the one that generally will read out that. And that was added within the last year, probably as a result of some impassioned members of the public on an item on the agenda, just to ensure that we have some decorum in the room. And I think that there's probably two schools of thought. Is one, you want to be consistent, and so at this point in time we're consistent, so we read out that preamble. And of course, part of it is you know your audience, and we have some members of the audience here, and I know that they're not unruly, and the decorum is quite pleasant. But so that's one school of thought where it is consistently read regardless of who is in attendance. And the other is, of course, only used as a reminder, and so you can have the preamble even embedded in the policy, but not necessarily read out, and either the chair of the particular meeting and or your parliamentarian could read that out as a reminder, folks, this policy, and then you go into the preamble. And so there's a bit of a tweak that you can, because yeah, I think it's true, as was mentioned to you this morning, it can be pretty intimidating coming up here and expressing yourself in front of a body, and then we read a preamble that says you better be on your best behavior or else. I'm exaggerating that, but so we currently use that preamble just to be consistent among all of your meetings, versus just bringing it out when we anticipate or we think that there might be some impassioned people speaking before you.
Thanks. Okay, so we've been going for about an hour. I have a round 2 list, but I see Director McClinton has popped up, so I'd like to go to him, and then we'll take a short break.
Thank you, Chair. Just on a personal note, you're doing a great job. It's been enjoyable so far. A couple comments. Just for me personally, the word safe space, ironically, is maybe a little bit triggering, just some of the other connotations it could have. Might respectfully, the word something along respectful environments might be received more by more of the public, just a thought. And just for me personally, I think for most part, we're saying a lot of the similar things. I'm in favor, I think holding this kind of role is an honor and a privilege, and sometimes it comes with a additional unexpected time and hours. Certainly you learn that as a first-time director. There's some things that are involved that maybe aren't anticipated. And one thing I think I've noticed in my area is that the director is really the main point of contact for governance, really at kind of at all levels, it seems. I'm just looking back through the history. Our area has often voted, whichever provincial government's in power has voted the opposition. and sometimes I think it can be challenging to maybe see things move forward. And so I just think that often the public doesn't know, what new bylaws have been passed, what new regulations have been passed until it affects them. And then they're usually doing a crash course in getting up to speed. And I just think providing people as many opportunities to sort of address us in a meaningful way. I know personally, I reach out to my community in a really active way, but when people come in and speak at the Electoral Service Area Committee from other areas, it's really helpful for me. Maybe I'm not fully up to date on an issue, or hearing the passion from people firsthand is important. So just some comments there. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Robbins, do you have anything else you want to add before we break? Okay, so what's the pleasure of the committee? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? And when we come back, I've got Directors Morrison, Martman, and Stone. Are you also on there for round two? I feel like we've had a fulsome conversation, so I hope we can come with some direction to move forward after the break. Thank you.
How long a break?
10 minutes.
Getting material into legislative services. Who does it come through? Does it come through the CAO at times? Does it come through the land services at times? Does it come through just directly from the director at times? And is that causing complications with getting that consistent, what I would call best practices of hearing the public? And so that's what I would like to, how do we tweak that? I actually don't like the word guardrails. I'd rather position it as best practices of how we best hear and support the public. Thanks.
Mr. Robbins, go
So
ahead.
just a comment, and we receive information on all of the above. And so we're looking at a way of helping funnel that information. We've just created a new email address that might help us in terms of shepherding that information to one area, and so that it gets on an agenda, it's distributed efficiently and effectively. And so that's one way we can help address that. But given points of contact, inevitably a member of the public or an applicant may have a specific contact and use that as the conduit with which to provide input. We certainly wouldn't want to cut that off. Just as you receive comments from constituents and from the members of public, we wouldn't. But we can, to the best of our ability, start to funnel some areas so that we can sort of consolidate that information. So we're looking at that as well. And one way is if things are submitted electronically, we may want to use a specific email address, for instance, with which to receive that. And so, because it is legislative services that is generally compiling this information, literally right up into the point of publication, and literally to the point when you're sitting down to actually start doing the business. And so we share the frustration as well in terms of being able to shepherd that a little more efficiently and effectively.
Thank you. Is that good, Director Martman? Do you have a follow-up? Okay, Director Stone.
Thank you. So I just want to be clear, I'm absolutely supportive of continuing public input. So I don't want people to misunderstand. I just think it's important that we encourage folks to give as much input as far in advance as possible, so it gives the proper time for consideration. An email address of publicinput@cvrd might be a great way to do that. We had some sort of misuse of the board email address when it was public, but if we understand and it's published everywhere, and everywhere you want to give input to the board on an item, it goes to public input and that's distributed to board members, that would be great. I was outside talking with Director McGonigal about a quote I heard recently, and I thought it was really good because I think this also plays a part in the conversation about the chair's role in facilitating good input. And somebody, and I don't know who came up with it, but it is, are you a thermometer or a thermostat? And the chair's role really needs to try and really embrace that role of being a thermostat, which is meaning sort of setting the temperature, the energy in the space, and trying to maintain that during difficult conversations. Because if you're a thermometer, you're just responding to if it's an elevated sense of conflict or worry or whatever, to reflect that back doesn't help good process. So it's also, you know, and I hear Director Morrison's comments around, you know, the consistency that we need, but we also need to, we're all different personalities and we have different ways. I'm trying to learn from feedback I hear from my fellow directors about when my humor is not appropriate or whatever, or how it might be taken, and how I often, and Tim and I had this conversation, am too often a thermometer, not a thermostat. But I think that mindfulness exercise, before we get into difficult conversations at the board table about trying to maintain that thought of being a thermostat, is really constructive to good debate at the table, but also facilitating a good public input or question period process. And just want to circle back to the comment that had alarm bells ringing in my mind, was this idea of facilitating input during the discussion of a DP or a DVP. I'd love to dig into that a little bit further, maybe not today, because we're talking about public input and question period. But it does concern me a little bit, because in my mind, I imagine, you know, public input during an item where you got the proponent there, and then it essentially sort of sets up a debate between the proponent and staff and members of the public. I think, without being too explicit, I think we're really responding to a societal situation that we have right now that is changed a lot in the last few years, right? And Director Istash said something about over the last 4 years. I think it's quite obvious that things are different. There's always been an inherent and most often healthy conflict and tension in government of any kind, but it feels a little different now than it did 5 years ago to me. Like there's a terrible difference between what I saw 5 years ago versus over, say, the last 4 or 5 years. And I think it's unfortunate because this actually even goes to what Director McClinton said about don't call it a safe spaces policy because it's triggering to some people. Call it respectful spaces policy. And I appreciate that Director Istash shared that policy and it is named as such. I think we need to try and find a way to set the thermostat at a place where everybody, despite what we may see as misinformation or we might not agree with, open that opportunity for dialogue and respect on all sides of issues. Because I think as we get more virtuous in some ways, we see it so much in our province specifically right now, we're setting up for conflict. Some of my best friends and I have very different political viewpoints, very different. I'm a progressive, but maybe more pragmatic than most people in my circle of friends. And a lot of my more conservative friends have very disparate views than I do. But we all remain friends because we're open and respectful with each other. We have good humor. And we realize that the fabric of our society is made up with a really broad diversity of viewpoints. So I think that, you know, I don't have the answer to it, or else I'd, you know, probably be in a different position than I am sometimes. But I think we need to sort of open up and set that thermostat at a nice sort of moderate temperature and allow people to represent their views, whatever it may be, and try and provide that respectful space for all viewpoints. And maybe if we can sort of set that thermostat a little bit lower, we can have better dialogue and better hear each other. Because it's as soon as we feel like we're triggered, if you will, that we don't hear each other anymore and we can't take those viewpoints that are maybe valid into consideration when we make decisions. But that's a soapbox that I should probably step down from. Thanks.
We're here for the soapbox. Mr. Robbins?
What's the temperature like today? Pretty chill.
I
If
set
it's-
a good temperature.
If that notion is universally held, then I created that. I was the one that came up with that.
Sorry, point of order, Madam Chair. I would say that the chair said it with her preamble to this meeting, Mr. Robbins, and I would appreciate if you'd stop trying to steal the chair's thunder.
Okay, with that, moving to Director Nicholson.
Thank you. This has been a super interesting conversation. this kind of public input engagement is super messy, but it is absolutely what our job is about. And I think I'm very concerned about the public's perception of democracy and their right to be heard. And I think we need to do as much as we can to put ourselves in the shoes of people who would like to engage and who feel they need to engage and figure out ways of engaging with them. So that said, today we're speaking specifically about public input period procedures. And I think I agree that we should get rid of that preamble unless we actually need to use it. So I'm always embarrassed when it's read out. But I would also say that, you know, if you wait till a public hearing, it's too late usually. And so I really welcome what I hear from the people that follow us, and then I welcome understanding when an issue is important enough that people will write to me or they will come to a meeting. That really does give you a good sense of how invested they are emotionally and personally. I think that on the public input part of the policy, which is about the allotment of 15 minutes, I do think when people come here, they don't know how this place works. I still don't know how this place works. We could have like a more welcoming information thing at the door. We could have someone welcoming people and asking them, you know, what they're here for, and then getting some gauge of how, encouraging people to provide input and getting some idea of the amount of time we're going to need. Because I do find it's super rude if we have an agenda and there's only room for 5 people, and then the chair doesn't invite a motion to extend it. That should be automatic in my view, because I think hearing from the public is what we're here about. So that should be automatic, but sometimes that doesn't happen, and it goes by, and I miss the opportunity because I'm not paying attention or whatever. So but you can manage that a lot better if you know generally how many people are here and what they're here to talk about, so that you can get a balance of different topics when you've got a big thing happening. But yes, we should also try and manage our agenda so that doesn't happen. What else did I think about? Input, safe environment, yeah, that's it. I know, my other thing was, I do want to have another conversation more along what Director Stone was getting at, was about how we can, if there is interest or a need or to reach out to the community to engage on issues from a more strategic point of view. Because I think that there is a lot of things that are worrying the community, and there isn't really a venue for them to express that to people who they feel can do something. And whether or not we can do something or not, I think we need to try and engage with people and let them know how government works better and at the local level and so forth. So I would like to have that conversation, but I recognize that's not really what we're doing right now. Thank you.
And so just to clarify, you're thinking like ways that the public can engage and learn more outside of what's specifically on an agenda, like they might have concerns about.
Yes, because often by the time we're making a decision about something, it's too late. We're already heading down a path.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting conversation. And I think what your other comments around, seeing who's in the gallery, that circles again around that roles and responsibility of the chair, vice chair conversation that we can talk about in the future. So I've got Director Wilson as the last name, but were you on there, Director McGonigal? You want to be on there? Yes? Okay. And Stone, I see you again. Go ahead, Director Wilson.
Thank you very much. I did have notes. Excuse me. I'm speaking.
There's his humor.
I did have notes just this long, but this is more like a conversation, and this is much better than to me, the kind of a strictly defined way of conducting business. This is great. I like this because there's a lot of stuff coming up here, because otherwise it's going to come up to the public, especially. May be seen as, excuse me, what may be seen as a conversation that might come up with a predetermined result, and that's what we don't need. One of the things that's come up there, and Director Nicholson, about talking to the members of the public, I do this all the time. Why not? Go out there, talk to the people in the gallery. They're here for a reason. Let's find out. And it's not that difficult. Again, favourite one of mine. One of the things that Director Markman brought up, and I'm glad he brought it up, was the phrase, the desire to be heard. That's an important one, because if we are going to engage with the public, they've got to be assured that they are not just being heard, but listened to as well. So that's something I think we should concentrate on. Thermometers and thermostats, I like that one. He's a thermometer. No, you're a thermostat. I'm a thermometer, because I go up and down all over the place, as you know. But getting to the point of all this, I love the conversations, love it. Anyway, in question period, somebody gets up, and if the chair can answer, he will answer, and he will always say, or she will always say, I'll get back to you. What happens if, and I'm guilty of this, I had to be reminded that I hadn't responded to something. What do you do next? Do you send an email? And if you do, where does it go to? Thank you.
Thanks. I think, yeah, Mr. Robbins talked about that shepherding information that we don't track. And so
No, and
that's-
I think that is likely a simple task for staff during a meeting, that we make note of that as well, and that we can follow up with the chair to make sure that the question is answered, and then you can consider whether or not you want to report back, the chair report back at the next time, if it's something that's of interest to the public, I suppose. Yeah, but we can keep track of that.
Director McGonigal.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And similar to Director McClinton, I'd like to acknowledge your excellence in chairing this portion of the meeting. There's my thermometer. Or is it a thermostat?
Thermostat.
Actually, on both points, I think both are important for us to do our business, whether it be public input or question period. But just acknowledging those that maybe did not attend in person, who have submitted electronically, that in the preamble of those meetings, that we at least acknowledge that those have been received as a preamble to the agenda, perhaps, as we introduce the agenda for Committee of the Whole. We'd like to thank those who have submitted electronically. It has been given out to the board for consideration, just to notify those that have electronically submitted some input, whether it be our board information package, that yes, we have received it, and we are acknowledging that we did receive it. Both are important parts of gauging what interest, not only within our areas, but regionally, is important to the electorate of the Cowichan Valley as a whole. We all come here with our municipal or electoral area hats, but we're here to make decisions as a region on a whole. And we have to place those ideals outside of the box of our own municipality, our community. It is our Cowichan that we are representing. And I think sometimes we veer away from that. I'm guilty, as in the past, of following that route. And when I set my thermostat, I bring myself back down to that. I think we feed off what the room is affording us in information. And if we can just take a deep breath, and as Chair Stone, or Director Stone in this case, has stated, maybe put it in a draft and leave it till the morning. If I have a response that I feel is inappropriate, I at least have to get it out of my head. So I'll type it out in a response, then I'll delete it. That way my brain won't blow up and the thermostat will stay at 72.
Okay, this list keeps growing. Thank you, Director McGonigal. So, Chair Stone, round 3. I just want to put it out there to committee, you know, I think we've had a really rich conversation, and I wouldn't mind moving back to the motion that Director Morrison is interested to put forward. Director Stone, are you okay with that? Sure. Director Morrison. He's backed off.
Thank you, Chair, and this has caused me to think of some other things that we could do as far as engagement, but for another time. I would move that we recommend to the board that we proceed with no changes to existing public input and question period policies as number 1, and number 2, that staff prepare a report encompassing committee discussion with possible recommended changes to be presented at a governance committee meeting this spring. I move that.
Okay, Director Wilson, was that a second?
Yes, it was.
Oh, okay. Discussion on the motion. Director Istash.
I won't comment on what I was going to bring up. We'll do that in the discussion part, but I thought someone else had put an amendment suggestion in there, and I thought it was good idea was that policy line item 3 be moved and replaces policy line item 5 so that we have consistency in the wording, because as also goes to that is kind of more neutral language that was brought up by several other directors. So that protocol requires all comments to be presented in a polite, calm, courteous manner using respectful language, civility, and decorum. And of course, to my further one, possibly there would be end with consideration of a respectful spaces bylaw, but that's a future addition. But yeah, so that line item 3 would be my amendment to the motion. Line item 3 from public input replace line item 5 in question period policy. Because I did like that other director, I wish I,
It was Director Abbott.
Director Abbott, I like that consistency language in there, so.
Mr. Robbins, is that all like following procedure properly? Do I ask for a seconder
Oh,
on
I
that
stopped being your
amendment?
parliamentarian like at 9:30.
I can't do this alone.
You're the vice chair, right?
So.
That's appropriate. That's an amendment to the main motion that.
Okay, and it
Yeah,
was
I did.
seconded. Okay, so discussion on the amendment. Director Morrison.
Yeah, I'm just gonna sort of go to a fallback best practices. When you wordsmith and amend on the fly like this, I get really nervous about unintended consequences. So I won't support the amendment because we've got staff coming back with a report to include discussion that's been considered. And so I think that, well, great suggestion. I'd like for our staff to have, looked at it, thought it through, and brought it back in a nice, clean form for us to consider.
Yeah, any more comments? Director Nicholson?
Maybe this is a question for staff, but it seems to me we had a pretty thorough discussion and that it might be more efficient to ask staff to come back with a slightly revised policy and a respectful environment policy at the same time, so that we could then continue the discussion based on what we've built today, right? But that's a question for staff. I'm not sure how they would prefer to proceed.
We could certainly, based on the direction today, we'll certainly do that. And just a note in terms of what your policy says and then what we provide in an open meeting as a preamble can be two different things. So your policy may have language that you might think needs to be tweaked, but you may want to keep it in the policy, but just our preamble then is changed. And we use a preamble when we're in a meeting appropriately, and as opposed to every single time that you convene a meeting. So those are options. And in that respect, we would put that into a report for you, and that you can make an ultimate decision with respect to whether you want to change that or not change that particular item.
Okay, thank you. Director Stone?
So speaking to that, I would prefer that the policy and the preamble be in lockstep, because if the preamble is challenged, the policy should support the preamble. But that being said, on the amendment, 6 of one, half dozen of the other, I have the sense that the draft the report will come back, and then we can make those decisions at the next meeting. So I appreciate Director Morrison's very consistent with that point of view. I'm also supportive of Director Estash, because I read those two things and it makes me feel very differently. And I know in talking with a couple of the directors, when we read those preambles out, sometimes I feel like I get triggered. And I think it's not setting the stage for setting the thermostat necessarily where we want to be, start with wagging the finger. And I wasn't pointing at anybody specifically. Anyway, so on the amendment, 6 of one, half dozen of the other, but I think that I respect that staff will bring back some drafts. We'll all have some time to leave it in our drafts for the weekend or until our next meeting, and then we can discuss it further and make those final amendments to the policy and hopefully bring that forward to the board.
Director Estash?
As a follow-up, it sounds like staff understand the intention if it does come back that the amendment doesn't pass them. I'll be okay with that. Sounds like the intent is there to create that consistency. So for ease, if it goes back to the original, so be it. So I thank for everybody sharing what they've shared.
Okay, so I will call the question on the amendment. Does anyone need that read out, or we're clear? Okay, call the question on the amendment. All in favor? And opposed? Motion carries. Right?
For the record, can we have the hands of those opposed again?
Those opposed, please raise your hand.
On the amendment, and opposed?
Opposed, put your hands high. Wilson, Morrison, Deck. Oh, and I didn't look online. But, Jesse. McClinton and Marv. Oh, so, and Justice. So,
I'll need a
motions.
count on that.
Can I get a tally on those numbers? Defeated?
Did you get those?
Sorry, my
How many
intent
opposed?
my intent was not to vote opposed. I was raising my hand to speak to the after the motion.
Okay, it looks like 4 opposed, motion carries.
Okay, motion carries. God. So, discussion
On the main motion
on the
as
main
amended?
motion as amended. Director Justice.
Thank you. This is more of a practice thing than policy, I suppose. I do think it's really important that the board demonstrate that we value and respect the input of community members. And I think public input is one way that we can do that. It's a particularly good opportunity often because we're dealing with people who are particularly activated over a certain thing, motivated to come and speak to us, or possibly they're mistrustful of something that's going on. So I think it's a really important way of building trust. However, what I wanted to say was that no matter what our policies of allowing public input, it's also really important that we look like we're paying attention. And when I look around the room, often when there is public input going on, there's a lot of people who are looking at their computers or doing something else. And I think if to the extent that that's the purpose of a public input period, I think it's really important that we're looking like we're paying attention. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion as amended? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, Director Stone.
Just a quick thought, and this is just in respect of Director Justice. I think especially during public input, as an active listener, I doodle a lot. I don't know if anybody's seen my papers after a meeting. It helps me listen a little bit squirrely, and it actually helps me focus and listen. So, but I think it's important, as he said, especially with members of the public. So if you ever see me sitting here, sometimes it's writing notes based on what I'm hearing somebody say. Sometimes it's just drawing little peace symbols or yin and yang things and stuff that just helps me think. I'm just being really open and honest with my quirks. So please, around our table, don't ever feel disrespected if I'm looking down. If I'm on my computer, yeah, I'm just on Facebook. But if I'm scribbling on a piece of paper, it's just trying to be thoughtful. Some other things that I heard and I think we should like ruminate on is like the community information meetings. I know that we require it as part of our development approvals process. It's really valuable, and it is on the developer or the proponent. I can't speak to the specifics of our policies, like at what point those happen. But it's that first opportunity for people, especially in the general vicinity of a proponent's project, to be able to give input, and then staff can include that in their reports. And I know, I believe I've seen it on some. And I was thinking about the community dialogues, like that 2050 series that we did, the Cowichan 2050 was amazing. And I think it brought out a really good cross-section of the community. So if that's what we're talking about getting out to community members and engaging, like thinking about things like climate, even conversations about how we bring respectful spaces and allowing people from all different perspectives and walks of life to sort of come together and say, hey, without being the issue we're talking about, let's talk about how we discuss these issues when they come up. Because then maybe we can sort of turn that temperature down a little bit and allow people to feel that they're respected and heard, whatever their perspective on an issue is. And I think that, it's that thing about active listening, right? And I know maybe it's hard to actively listen to me when I talk so much. But I'm really passionate about it because I think it's like an epiphany for me, right? I've had a really challenging few years, right? Like when I was first couple years in the chair and in our municipality, Ladysmith is much quieter, as is the West, than the core. But I've seen what the mayors and chairs have gone through. I've experienced some really difficult challenges in my previous tenure as chair. So I've had to do some work myself to be able to come to a place where I'm like, listen, let's just really welcome everyone. Despite our personal feelings or disagreements with people's perspectives, I'm not good at it. It was brought to my attention at our last meeting that I react to what's being said sometimes as a thermometer, and that's hurtful to my colleagues who I respect very much and the people that I care about. So that's work I'm trying to do as a human being, not just a locally elected leader. So I'm trying to learn to be more active and listening and open in my own thoughts to hearing what people say. So I hope that this was really great. I really appreciate Director Wilson's comments about how this meeting's unfolded. I've really enjoyed it. I feel like it feels good. I feel like I want to have a big hug. Too bad for you guys at home, you don't get any of that. But I think if we can use this as the tone as we go forward into all of our different meetings and stuff, maybe this is especially at community meetings, and I know Director Nicholson's asked for this, and maybe this is an epiphany I just had, that when we engage with each other at committee in this way, that we can actually do better work. And so respect to the chair, because I think you set that tone, and to everybody who participated today, because I feel really good about this meeting on a day where I didn't sleep well last night because I was concerned about some of the things that are going on in the region. I feel a little bit better about it after the conversation that we had this morning. Thanks.
Thank you for those words. And Director Istash, you want a little short note?
A short note, and it wasn't relevant to that amendment. That's why I didn't have my hand up earlier. It was just a quick comment back just to follow up on what Director Nicholson said about community engagement. I just wanted to take the opportunity as I scrolled through here and looked through the CVRD website. The work staff has done, you can be infinitely engaged on every topic by email and by text message as well. I think there's 30 different opportunities to be notified on anything that happens at CVRD. So there is a huge opportunity there. People just need, of course, as a board and as an organization, you can only provide information so much. We need to remind the public of their onus. Engagement is two ways. So that if we provide the opportunity, take advantage of the opportunities and sign up for some of these. I think at North Cowichan, we have 4 different newsletter captures that you can get, and I'm looking here, and there's 30 different newsletter or text message opportunities on every aspect of the regional district, and that doesn't include the engagement opportunities on Plan Your CVRD. So yes, we need to make opportunities, but at the same time, maybe it's just following up to the work you're asking staff to do or board members to do, maybe it's just remind people on Plan Your CVRD and the Notify Me page on the CVRD website. So it's just to share that there, to acknowledge that staff has taken, looks like, previous board direction and has done good work. So I just want to acknowledge staff and then remind the public that may be tuned into this exciting meeting that they have opportunities. So check out the CVRD website and the Plan Your CVRD website.
Maybe we'll build a funnel to direct everyone in the CVRD towards our website. There might be a director among us that could help us with that. Director Staples.
Thank you. Yeah, I've really appreciated this. I always appreciate it when we get to have more open conversation because it just feels like we're able to kind of, particularly for something like this, just explore things in a different way. And I apologize already to Director Stone for my my ongoing teasing of him today, which is completely outside of the code of conduct. But yeah, I feel like, you know, Director Stone brought up the engagement that was done during Cowichan 2050 and just any public engagement that I've been a part of, you know, prior to pandemic times was very different than engagement is now. And I think one thing that we always have to remember, and that I know I have to remind myself of all the time now, is that not everyone wants to come along, and we have to accept that we can have as much engagement as we possibly can. We can be as transparent and as open about all the things that we're able to do. And that there are, you know, people who just will never be interested to take that at face value, to show up, to listen, to hear, and to, you know, to want to accept that this is what's happening. And that's something that's been really hard for me to learn and to accept, because I always believe that we can find a common way forward. And I've had to accept that maybe the majority of people can always find a common way forward, but maybe there's some people who that's just not where they're at right now, and I have to accept that. And John Jack was one of the people who really helped me work through that with people. Sometimes people aren't interested in building relationships, and for people that are really, where that is something that we're really care about, it can be really hard for us to accept the fact that not everyone is ready to do that with us. And so, yeah, so that's sort of something I just wanted to share, because it's definitely a work in progress for me, because we can completely disagree, but if we can't agree on, you know, what's actually happening, that's a problem. And so sometimes we just have to accept that. So I appreciate all of the things that we're doing and all of the public engagement, and just for us to keep that in mind, and hopefully more people, you know, hopefully that will change over time as well. We're just not at a time where we're at that change yet. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this was a great conversation. Thank you all for being so supportive for my first chairing of a meeting. And I want to say I'm really grateful. Oh, thank you. I wanted to say just about the timing of the meeting, I'm really grateful to the Muni directors that this might not be as an ideal a time for you, but it really allowed us to have the space for this conversation. Going forward, I'm open to rotating or being flexible in terms of scheduling this committee, but I do remember last year having governance committee before committee of the whole, and those days felt really packed. I want to remind everyone about their homework, these beautiful binders that have been put together. Please read it at your leisure, and I think it's just so important. And I'll readily admit I haven't read it either yet, so this will be my first time reading many of these policies. And just for us to have our, you know, the foundation of a collective understanding of what the policies are that exist, that guide our jobs. And then in terms of direction for moving forward, I feel like our conversation circled around a lot of the chair and vice chair roles and responsibilities. But Mr. Robbins, what policy or bylaw is that actually contained in, that idea?
Oh, you've caught me off guard.
Sorry.
I'm not sure if there's anything embedded.
Is it the bylaw 2922? Like, there's this
your procedures.
designation of chair and vice chair in part 3 there.
What we can do, and if you, I'm cognizant of your time, but I just thought in respect to that, we'll come back with something. Part of what you were talking about is providing some tools for the chair to help with engagement. And so we just had an offline discussion earlier when we took the break about perhaps that's where you might want to go, is to talk a bit about roles and responsibilities to help the chair manage these policies. And so maybe that's an area that we can come back at your next meeting, in addition to you receiving or legislative services hearing feedback from directors as to what policies that you might want next. But that's one area that we might suggest that you hit before you go through all the list of your policies. We'll come back with a report, by the way, to summarize, and I was going to summarize what we heard today, but we got the notes, and I'm not sure that we need to go over what we heard just to summarize. We'll come back with the report at the next, but you may want to do that, is just have a session about roles and responsibilities and how you can support the chairs at various meetings.
So looking around the room, does that seem like a good direction to go in? Director Stone?
I wonder, though, if that better flows from the board and committee policy and procedures, right? So once we define how the meetings and stuff should be run, or in conjunction with, I think it's hard to talk about how chairs and vice chairs and directors do our business in a meeting if we haven't defined how those meetings should run. And I think they're necessarily part of maybe the same conversation. But I'm looking at the board policy and procedures, and there's conversations around chair and vice chair. But I think we do need to better define those roles, and that's to reflect the desire, I think, that we've heard from the group of really being able to define what an ESC committee chair is, and then reflect on those workloads and the supports that are needed, and the authority that goes with that. But I'm willing to, this is going to be a garden path of discussion, I think, and maybe that's, reflecting on Director Wilson's comments, maybe that's just the best way it unfolds.
No, and we can intertwine those, and we'll come back and we'll have in our pocket as well as perhaps some best practices that we can sort of intertwine with, well, as you're going through the policies, and intertwine roles and responsibilities for you as well at the same time. The last thing that I wanted to, before I left you, just to remind you of your strategic plan, and in particular 6.3 and 2.4, and I'll quote from 6.3 of your strategic plan: enhance public awareness and participation. So you're doing that. And the other thing about engagement is, and you've heard it from staff before when we engage the public, that we actually have a public engagement toolkit, and that's based on an international standard, the International Association of Public Participation. So we're well grounded in that. And if we can find a way to solidify on our website the opportunities to show, and I know when you go to various places on the website, it probably tells you how you can engage. If there's a way for us to provide the public better awareness of those opportunities, we'll work on those things as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Director Wilson.
I promise I'll be very, very quick. That's an interesting point, because as Director Istas has brought up, there's all these places you can go to. Where do you go? It's all very well having this, but you don't want to put them in 30 different places. If we can come up with a web page which says, if you want to talk about this, it's all listed there in one place. You're not searching all the time. Basically, it's bookkeeping more than anything. Thank you.
All right. So moving forward in the agenda, right? No unfinished business, no new business. We move to question period. Please approach the lectern if you have a question for me.
This room is electrically charged, just got zapped by the mic. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You did an excellent job, and there was a lot of good things said today. One of the points that I would like to bring to your attention and ask as a question is when it comes to for information for the public to have access and to digest, the agenda is published on Friday, and not always is all the information, as we've seen today, is available for the public to peruse and offer an opinion on, but also that feedback back and forth on an educational spot. So what can be done to maybe improve that?
Yeah, that crossed my mind during our discussions that we're, looking for thoughtful input from the public, that they take time to maybe write it and save it as a draft and then send it, but our agenda's published on Friday. Maybe they don't look at it till Monday. And so I don't know what the answer is, but I know that our CAO has been taking notes diligently, and that everyone around this table is clearly interested in optimizing our connection with the public and to hear their input.
Thank you for that. On the question or the topic of public information meetings, before the changes to the public hearing, where there was a CVRD-run public information meeting, it was considered more a safe or respectful place for the people, because they wanted to come to the board and or to the staff and the directors at the meeting to ask questions. And then that was removed and replaced with a developer-led public information meeting. People don't feel that same degree of respect and safe place and access to the staff and directors. So what can be done to maybe improve upon that?
Well, that sounds like changes before my time. Because I've only seen a public information meeting with staff and the developer, but you remember public information with directors. Is that what and that felt more comfortable?
It was led by the CVRD and not led by a proponent.
I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking about the information meeting in Area H with, that was led by CVRD staff, correct? Yeah. That was on the Schnitzer Steel file in Director Bartman's area. So, I mean, that's the only public information meeting that I've been to, and it was led by staff.
Okay, that's good to know, because that hasn't always been the case. Maybe there's not consistency in
And
that.
I think that was maybe directed by the director. I don't know if Director Martman can pipe up, or is he allowed? No, this is just me.
Yeah.
I'm the chair. Yeah, I can talk to my fellow directors and get back to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, well done. It's a privilege to be here in person in the gallery and witness the good vibes in the room and the constructive conversation. Sorry, that was a speech. My question is, how does the CVRD measure the approachability and accessibility and effectiveness of the dialogue that individual elected officials have in their areas? And as a follow-up question, how would one go about establishing, as Mayor Staples mentioned, or reestablishing a very fulsome, robust, and healthy dialogue?
Yeah, that sounds like a question for the communications team that I will have to ask and get back to you on. It's a big question and important.
Much appreciated.
Yeah.
The other question that I have is, if someone does have a burning or a strong opinion about something, and they feel they've explored and exhausted all the available protocols and resources to them, is it a negative connotation to write a letter to the editor and to use that as an outlet for public input?
I don't know. I mean, this is I feel like, people can write letters to the editor at any time, right? That's part of our public process of free speech. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have more questions, but I think what I've heard today is they should be written. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Robbins, do I go back to you?
Or you could just call for an adjournment.
Moved, seconded. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
If I might ask those online and everybody to remain in the room here just for just a brief moment, please.
Sorry?